Hello everyone, my name is Paula Santos and I am the Senior Manager of Learning and Engagement at Intuit, the Center for Intuitive and Outsider Art. Today, I am so glad to invite you into our museum and to show you the wonderful show that you can see right behind me. It's called Outsider Art, the collection of Victor F. Keane. Now, Victor is someone who was taken with self-taught and outsider art, and he began collecting in the 1970s. The artwork that he has collected over time are some of the best examples out there of self-taught and outsider art. As we walk through the galleries, you'll see the different techniques, the materials, the stories. You'll see why we look at this artwork and what makes it so compelling to keep coming back to again and again. So I am excited to go on this journey with you. The first artist we will look at is Martín Ramírez, so follow me. The first artist we're going to talk about is the great Martín Ramírez. Martín Ramírez is an artist that has been widely exhibited and is considered to be one of the greatest self-taught artists and just artists in general. One of the very fascinating aspects of Ramirez is that he came to the United States as a migrant Mexican worker. He traveled from his native Jalisco to Texas and then to California at the time when California and the United States just was in need of labor. The railroads were being built, mining was in full swing. So Ramirez, with a couple of friends, traveled through train to sites where their labor was needed. And, you know, they had this idea in mind, like many other migrant workers, that they were going to work, earn the money that they wanted to earn, and then return home. In Ramirez's case, he ended up living the rest of his life in California due to circumstances truly beyond his control. And before I get into that, I want to share a little bit about the visual details we see in this work. Now, the work of Ramirez is incredibly recognizable. Wherever you go, you come across his lines, you come across these what at times look like concentric circles or half circles. You know you're looking at Ramirez. And this drawing in particular takes us into this journey with these two trains that are coming in and out of these tunnels. And the closer that you look, the more that you question, where are they coming from? Where are they going? One visual detail I want to point out is that this train is bending here, and you see that Ramirez gives us that detail here of perhaps an opening. You know, it's bending in a way that is, you know, to say the least, unnatural for a train, but it also kind of squeezes that train to this track that's right here and into this tunnel space. And as we follow along this train here, we start noticing that, you know, beyond the lines, we have these tunnels here that have this kind of like orange and red color to them. You start noticing that these lines have depth to them. In particular, over here we have these lines with some white kind of mixed in here, which gives them more of a kind of rounded feeling to them, rather than, you know, this sort of flat surface that you might expect at first glance. Ramirez used the materials that he had on hand. After the Great Depression, himself and many other Mexican migrant workers were left without jobs, and he found himself in a situation where he was confused, he didn't quite know where he was, and he was put in a psychiatric hospital where he remained for the rest of his life. He traveled, I think it was a couple of them. While he was there, that is where he began to draw. And he had materials such as matchsticks. He was I believe like a chain smoker. So he had these matchsticks that he would use as a type of graphite, for example. He would also make his own glue out of potato starch. And that glue is an interesting detail to think about, because here we have this very long drawing where he glued several sheets of paper together. So as you get closer, you see that what you're looking at is not one, nice, beautiful, flat sheet of paper. What you're seeing is several different notebook pieces of paper here. You start to see the faded lines of that notebook paper. And being able to glue the pages together also gave him a lot of control as to how, large these drawings were. This is a piece that really invites you in, and from corner to corner, you start noticing the level of depth that Ramirez included in all of his drawings. The artist we're looking at now is Hawkins Bolden, and here we have two assemblages or sculptures that are hanging on the wall. Hawkins Bolden is someone who, when you look at his work, you start to really wonder how the materials feel and how the materials were put together. And that's what I really want to focus on when we look at this work. What we have here are pieces of metal that have been punched through, and you have this pieces of sort of this vinyl cloth that have been wired, there's this wire here that has attached them to this circular metal plate here. And especially I want to draw your attention to this bigger hole that we have here where this vinyl is coming through. Now, Hawkins Bolden was someone who lost his sight early in his life through a baseball accident. So pretty early on, he had to figure out how to move through the world through his other senses. So he had this heightened sense of touch and how to make and how to put textures together. He would seek out his materials from discarded things in alleyways and different lots, pretty much whatever he could find. And he would keep them, he would store them, and then when he was ready to make, he would just feel his way through everything that he had acquired and start making based on the materials that he felt his way through. So when we look at this work, I think about how this metal feels to the touch, how cold it feels, the softness of the vinyl versus the harshness and hardness of the metal that we have here, and how both of those materials work together to give you that sensory experience that is very unique to his work. And then if we look at this material, or this assemblage here rather, perhaps we notice what that material is. I think to me it looks like a gasoline can. And again, you have this textile here, this kind of fabric And both of these, again, have that play between the hard and the soft and kind of this cold metal exterior. I also mentioned these holes here, these larger ones, and you see them here too. Hawkins Bolden made his own tools. So in order to give his sculptures the type of shape and be able to puncture them in the way that he wanted, he, had to devise a way to do that. One thing that is interesting to consider when you look at this work is that he began making scarecrows out of these materials because he wanted to make sure that the birds wouldn't get into his family's vegetable garden. So first, they were more sort of humanly shaped, and they had human faces. And if you look at this one in particular, you do get that sense of perhaps it is a face. And perhaps this is a tongue, maybe this is hair. So when you look at the work, sometimes you see those instances of, are there details that maybe you think it's a face or it's human in some way. So the painting we're looking at now is by the artist Clementine Hunter. Clementine Hunter is such an interesting figure to me, so fascinating, because she became a painter later in her life, and she lived in a plantation and worked there. She was definitely in the field. She worked doing hard manual labor. Her family was a sharecropping family in Louisiana, and eventually they moved from the plantation where she was born to the Melrose plantation in the same county in Louisiana. However, the Melrose plantation was a different type of place from the one where she came from. It was a place where artists and other creatives came to stay and were there creating, and there was this sense of arts and community. When she was working there, she eventually was moved into domestic work inside the house, which meant that she was no longer out in the fields picking cotton anymore. And while she was in the home, the story goes that as she was cleaning up, she came across some discarded paint and materials, and she asked if she could keep them, and that's how she first began painting, and she was in her 40s by that point. So she created thousands of paintings, and the reason I give you this backstory for her is because the paintings that she has created show her life at the Melrose plantation and the life of the people who were around her. Now here we have this very long and large painting that shows the different types of activities that would be happening outdoors. With people who were picking cotton. So I'll focus first on this portion over here. What you see are all of these people carrying cotton during different stages of either picking it. For example, right here you have these two figures that are carrying these gigantic bags that are overflowing with cotton. And then up here, Clementine Hunter shows us these wagons full of cotton with these two people riding with this donkey right here that's looking straight at us. And then you see that all of this cotton is being taken to this part right here where it's being processed so it can be shipped. And this is the shape that it was in. This is how they were packaged in order for them to be shipped onto other parts of the country. Cotton was just an incredible commodity for this part of the country. Now, I think one of the reasons why this painting is so compelling to me when I look at it is that it definitely gives you a sense of what it not only looked like, but maybe might have felt like to be working on any given day on the plantation. There are several photographs out there of around the time when this painting was painted of different people carrying these bags, picking cotton. You also have images of people doing the laundry, as we see in that far corner over there, in these giant pots. So you have photographic evidence out there of what this time was like in Louisiana and in the South, but Clementine Hunter gives us this wide, expansive painting where people are against this, brilliant yellow background. There's this blue sky overhead. Up here you see her mixing color where you have some reds and yellows against that blue, perhaps to give you a sense of maybe the time of the day is changing, perhaps there's a beautiful sunset coming. You really get the sense that when you're out here, you can feel an expanse of space. She also is very playful in the way that she depicts the people in her paintings. I already mentioned this donkey looking straight at us. One last tidbit I'll leave you with is that since she was such a prolific painter, paint is a scarce resource. So she would, kind of thin out her paint, and you can see a little bit of that, especially up here in the sky. But as I said, cotton was so central to life here that when she depicts that cotton, it's this heavy hand of the white. So every single time we see it, whether it's here, when it's being carried, when it's being processed, when it's being put on wagons, you get this like thick layer and these thick dots all across. And, that just contributes to the feeling of what daily life on the Melrose plantation must have felt like. The painting we're looking at now is by the artist William Hawkins. When I look at this painting, I am so drawn in by the surface. Now, the surface of the painting is many things. It's the type of paint Hawkins used, it's the type of surface, what he painted on. It is also the different types of color and how they work with each other. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of all these facets of Hawkins' work as we look at these details together. Hawkins was someone who came to painting later in his life, and someone who was very, very taken with photographs of different architecture, of cityscapes. He was known to amass a large collection of different types of clippings from newspapers, different types of photographs, which is what he would base his paintings on. There are certain buildings and certain architectural things that he would keep returning to in his work, although that wasn't his only subject matter. He had other types of stories and other types of figures he liked to paint. But this one is one of the ones that he returned to, which was the painting these buildings. So as you look at this, first you start noticing that there's this repetition of all of the windows from one side of the building here and then the other side of the building. The perspective here is a little bit strange, although once your eyes adjust, you can see that right here is the corner of the building, and we're seeing two sides of windows from our vantage point. And the windows are quite different. Here you have Hawkins depicting them in black and yellow and gray, and here you have him depicting them in white. And below here we also have windows or sort of doorways, the more sort of street level part of the building. And then you also have some architectural details up here, which are the decorative elements of the building. Now, when I first started, I said that the surface of Hawkins' paintings is of particular interest to me, and that is because he uses this type of paint called enamel for many of his paintings. And the more that you look at it and the closer you get, you start noticing that this paint is really shiny. It really makes the light bounce off of the painting. It gives it this sheen that is not unlike, my nail polish color, this enamel color. And especially in this blue, you can really tell how that shiny surface gives this painting kind of this very incredible life to it. Another thing I'll note is that Hawkins liked to paint, especially on this type of board called masonite. And the reason he liked to work on masonite was because it didn't, quote unquote, eat up the paint. So if any of you out there work with canvas, you know that canvas can really absorb paint. And something like masonite just lets something like masonite lets the paint roll off the surface. And in fact, for many of his paintings, that's how he would paint. He would let the paint roll off the surface. He would move the board around in order to get the shapes that he wanted. Another thing to note about Hawkins' method in painting was that he liked to work straight from a paint can. So traditionally, you have this idea of an artist that has a paint palette and they're mixing on their palette. But by people who have seen Hawkins' work while he was alive, they saw him use this very threadbare brush, and he would dip his brush straight into paint cans in order to work on the surfaces of his paintings, which is such an interesting detail because even though when you're farther apart you see that there's like this rhythm and this sense of order to the painting, the closer you look, the more you start seeing those paint splatters. You start seeing where that paint might have dripped, perhaps from his can to the surface of the masonite. Here you have drops of red, over here you have drops of blue. So you see that there's like speckling throughout, which Hawkins left on the surface, so he must have liked how it looked, and it really gives this painting a really, really dynamic surface that is so engaging to look at and that really makes you want to look again and again. Thank you for following along. I hope you enjoyed the time we spent together with these works of art. I encourage you to check out the rest of our educational videos on the Intuit YouTube channel and on our website.